Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And we have just come back from Luminary Bakery.
You may be familiar with Luminary Bakery because Meghan Markle featured it in her guest-edited September issue of British Vogue, and also because we've talked about it on this podcast a few times before. It's near us in Stoke Newington, and we have loaded up on brownies and cookies and tiffin.
Yeah, tiffin bites.
So that's what we'll be doing after this. But right now, we have something really important to talk about because I can't believe it, Tom, but we haven't talked about Camilla in a few weeks.
I know.
And she was really busy this week. So let me just tell you some of the things she was doing. She was visiting Asda, the supermarket, where she posed with some pak choi in front of a van. Great pictures.
Loved that.
She shared a very cute post. Well, Clarence House did. Although maybe her, because she's a whiz on the internet now. A very cute post on Clarence House Instagram, talking about how much she loves talking to her dogs.
Oh, I loved that.
She also made an appearance on radio. She was co-hosting the Emma Barnett show on BBC Radio 5.
I really like this because we got to hear her talk about Silver Swan's ballet. So,
in that deep baritone voice that you love so much.
I'm just saying, I mean, no offence, mate, but if Camilla ever wants to co-host Airheads with me, I'm not saying no. But yeah, we got to hear all about Silver Swans, the ballet lessons that she does for over 50s.
You make it sound like she's leading them.
I wish.
I remember we talked about it when she went like a few months ago, but now she's doing these ballet lessons via Zoom. Would love to see her workout gear.
Yeah.
Please give us a video of her doing her ballet lessons. But Emma Barnett, the host, asked...
You've obviously been knocking down with your husband. Did you get him to have a plie or two? Did you get him to try?
I did not get him doing a plie, but he is a very, very fit man.
I loved that. This did like double service because it both implied that she was still very horny for him and also was like the party line of Charles is incredibly fit and not the sickly king that Will implied he was by saying he often gets chest infections.
Yeah, you remember we were like cracking up at that when Charles had coronavirus and Will did an interview and he talked about how poor Charles is always getting... He's had so many chest infections. But Camilla was straight out with the party line. She said, he's probably the fittest man of his age I know. He'll walk and walk and walk. He's like a mountain goat. He leaves everybody miles behind.
I love mountain goat Charles.
Me too. You know, Charles may be terribly fit, but... we've got one royal who is unfit for purpose in myriad ways.
Of course, we are talking about Andrew, who has had to cancel his annual golfing trip to Spain this summer because he is nervous about leaving the UK.
So this came after, you know, we've been talking the last few weeks about how the US Justice Department has made this official request, the MLA request that we were talking about, to question him as a witness about Epstein. And The Sun had a report that a palace insider is now saying that it's unlikely Andrew will leave the UK for some time and will never travel to the US again.
Oh my God.
You might remember last year Andrew going on his lovely sunny holiday to stay in a friend's mansion in Costa del Sol just days after his good buddy, the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, died.
How the worm has turned.
He seems to be struggling because the New York Times had a report this week that Andrew's lawyers had been in discussions in recent weeks with a Washington lobbyist who has ties to the Trump administration. Ooh. About the possibility of assisting Andrew with the fallout from all the Epstein mess. And so this lobbyist, his name is Robert Strick. He has a history of taking on clients with what the New York Times describes as unsavory reputations that other Washington lobbyists may shy away from. But despite his other clients, he took one look at Andrew and he said absolutely no way. Apparently he expressed discomfort about the possibility of working with Andrew.
And I mean, some of the other people that he's represented, include Isabel dos Santos, who's the daughter of Angola's former president, who is accused of embezzling millions of dollars from a state oil company that she once headed. And he also represented the government of a former Congolese president, Joseph Kabila, which had faced American sanctions for human rights abuses and corruption.
After all that, he said, sorry, Prince Andrew, I can't do a thing for you.
I mean, maybe neither of these people had ever been like, do you know what, I think I'm going to give an interview.
Now, though, according to the Telegraph, Andrew doesn't know what to do with himself. He doesn't know how to proceed, and he is reportedly agonising over whether to publicly condemn Ghislaine Maxwell. And they have this incredible quote from a source close to Andrew who says, Voltaire on his deathbed, who was asked by the priest to renounce the devil, replied, "This is no time to be making enemies." The same applies to Prince Andrew. Does it? He is damned if he does, and damned if he doesn't. This doesn't seem a good time for him to publicly come out and criticise her. It would seem bad timing to do that now. In whose mind?
Or is it, I mean, it's been bad
The
timing.
very least he could do.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that he hasn't already condemned her is bad enough.
It's crazy. And we've heard a lot. There's been other stories since last week's episode about, will Ghislaine sell out Prince Andrew? Will she turn him over? Will she share what she knows about him? And it's like, what does she know? What would she say? Why is he hiding? What's he worried about? If he hasn't done anything wrong, he shouldn't have any problem with her speaking about him, and he certainly shouldn't have any problem publicly renouncing her. She is not an ally you want to have now or ever.
I know, and I mean, this is exactly what got him into hot water about this interview. Well, I mean, there were many things, but the fact that he wouldn't say that he regretted his friendship with Epstein. Yeah,
he just hasn't learned from his mistakes whatsoever. One thing I saw that was potentially relevant here, was that the Daily Mail spoke to a former friend of Ghislaine's, unnamed, who claimed that Ghislaine has thumb drives with copies of all of Epstein's sex tapes. It's kind of a salacious way of putting them. But
yeah, I mean, rape tapes would be more apt. But we talked about those before. They mentioned them on the Filthy Rich documentary as well, that Epstein had cameras in all of the rooms and that
he was allegedly filming everything, though nobody has seen any of these tapes, so we don't know if they're real. But the former friend of Ghislaine says, Ghislaine has always been as cunning as they come. She wasn't going to be with Epstein all those years and not have some insurance. The secret stash of sex tapes I believe Ghislaine has squirreled away could end up being her get-out-of-jail card if the authorities are willing to trade. Not only did Epstein like to capture himself with underage girls on camera, he wanted to make sure he had something to hold over the rich and powerful men who took advantage of his sick largesse. I'll bet anything that once it comes out that Ghislaine has those tapes, these men will be quaking in their Italian leather boots.
That was such a good little detail about the leather boots.
That's probably enough, Andrew, for today.
Yeah. Some people whose boots we didn't see were Harry and Meghan because they were on a Zoom call.
Rather inelegant segue, but we'll proceed. Harry and Meghan took part in a Zoom call this week with some representatives from the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, of which they are president and vice president respectively. I love this. We were so excited to see this. I'm sure many of you have watched the video already. If you haven't, you should. It's not long and it's really interesting. But I liked that Harry mostly took a backseat in this and just let other people talk. But to my great surprise, and I think yours as well, he did have some words to say about the Commonwealth's foundations in British Empire and colonialism.
I know, and this came out a day after our episode last week where we had said someone in the British royal family needs to talk about their own history. And so I was really pleased. What he said was,
certainly when you look across the Commonwealth, there's no way that we can move forward unless we acknowledge the past. And I think so many people have done such an amazing, incredible job of acknowledging the past and trying to right those wrongs. But I think we all acknowledge on here that there is so much more still to do. It's not going to be easy, and in some cases it's not going to be comfortable, but it needs to be done because guess what? Everybody benefits.
Yeah, and then Meghan added to that.
We have to, in this moment in time, say, we're going to have to be a little uncomfortable right now, because it's only in pushing through that discomfort that we get to the other side of this and find the place, as you're pointing out, where a high tide raises all ships. Equality does not put anyone on the back foot. It puts us all on the same footing, which is a fundamental human right. And that's what we're talking about here.
And that's so Meghan, you know. Yeah. Harry, you know, did a decent job, but Meghan is the one who can really speak eloquently in these kind of situations. And although Harry did say some other very interesting things, like, and I realise we're focusing on the one white member of this conversation, but given his position as a member of the royal family, it is particularly interesting that he would say these kinds of things. Like, he said that the young leaders had inspired optimism and hope because there's no turning back now. Everything is coming to a head. Solutions exist and change is happening far quicker than it ever has done before. He also talked about unconscious bias. He said,
and when it comes to sort of institutional and systemic racism, it's there and it stays there because someone somewhere is benefiting from it. We can't deny or ignore the fact that all of us have been brought up and educated to see the world differently. However, once you start to realize that there is that bias there, then you need to acknowledge it.
I think, like you said, we're focusing on Harry, but for somebody who is part of that institution, the monarchy, to even say the word systemic racism,
I know,
is a pretty big step. I mean, it's also the bare minimum, but it's, you know, even just doing the bare minimum, it's a big step compared to the rest of the family.
And Meghan really highlighted how this kind of racism is so insidious. And she said,
you know, it's not even in the big moments, right? It's in the quiet moments where racism and unconscious bias lies, and as you've said, lies and hides and thrives. And it's those nuances that I think makes it confusing for a lot of people to understand the role that they play in that, either passively or actively, but I think even more so passively.
Which I wonder is her good pal Jessica Mulroney taking a hint there.
Yeah. We also got a statement after the call from the CEO of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, Nicola Brentnell, who said, "We have started a conversation in the Queen's Commonwealth Trust about how the Commonwealth's past of colonialism, of the subjugation of peoples, and the ongoing legacy of such historic injustice can and should shape the identity of the organisation, how it develops its offer, and how it works in the future."
It's so interesting to name those things, like, you know, to be as direct as that and to address it head on. And immediately people were getting very worked up, but straight away there was a report in Newsweek that said Buckingham Palace were told in advance about Harry and Meghan's comments, recognising the uncomfortable past, and that they are fine with them. A royal source said, "The Queen's Commonwealth Trust is a separate entity which is about giving opportunities to young people within the Commonwealth. It's fine, they're fulfilling that independent remit. Buckingham Palace knew about it, so it's not a surprise or anything like that. Part of the work it's doing is looking at the history of the Commonwealth. It's what they're there for, and it's important for young people to look into it." Which is very measured, I thought.
I feel like it's the smartest thing these people have done in a while to say, like, okay, let's quash any possible rumours that, like, the Queen is angry about this, because it'd be such a bad look if the Queen is seen to be angry that someone's pointing out the uncomfortable past in relation to the British Empire.
But then they immediately undid that good work by saying that actually it would just be too difficult for the Queen to back Black Lives Matter or speak out herself on Britain's colonial past. The source said, "I think you would have to look at it that anything like that would be very political, and that is a topic you would not therefore expect Her Majesty to get drawn in on."
We've said it before, so many people have said it. Black Lives Matter is not a political statement.
I know. I mean, it's just exhausting at this point that they keep trotting out that excuse.
Yeah.
And thinking it's valid.
Yeah, and I think once you say Black Lives Matter is a political stance, then you're saying so much about the political situation in the country. You're implying that white lives matter more.
Yeah, and that kind of conservative politics is the standard, and anything outside of that is getting political. You know, despite all of this, Harry was basically accused of being a race traitor. The commentary and the response to this were outrageous to me.
Yeah.
Like, we saw people calling for them to lose their titles, to lose their positions in the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. People saying that he was risking the anger of the Queen, that he was picking a fight with the Queen, that he was attacking the Commonwealth, he was taking a swipe at the British Empire. I'm like, oh, how dare he? That he was lecturing people while being completely unaware of his own unearned privilege. All of which is to say people just didn't want to hear what he has to say.
That's exactly the case, because, you know, the only one of those arguments that would possibly make me pause for a second is the one about him speaking from a place of such incredible unearned privilege about these matters. But like you say, the reason people bring that up, the people who are saying that are people who aren't listening to these arguments, no matter who's saying them.
Yeah, they say it as if they'd rather be hearing from people who don't have that kind of privilege. And yet, rather than discussing what the less privileged members of that Queen's Commonwealth Trust call had to say, they fixate on Harry to essentially to undermine and distract from the message that he was sharing and that all of them were sharing, and that they can use him as the scapegoat to avoid having to actually engage with the topic at hand. It does underline, though, I think, the tricky position that Harry and Meghan are in terms of that balance between bringing attention to an issue and pulling focus from it. One of the participants in this call, Alicia Wallace, who is director for Equality Bahamas, wrote about her experience being on the call for Zora, which is a Medium publication for women of colour. And I thought it was really interesting how she explained the whole backdrop to their conversation. I mean, you should read the whole piece if you haven't already. It's very short. But she says, choosing to be a part of this conversation was complicated. I decided to be there knowing that there would likely be criticism of a pro-black anti-capitalism advocate who's calling for wealth distribution to dare to sit with people whose titles are symbols of a legacy from which we need to be freed. The persisting relics of colonisation do not sit well with many of us, and we struggle to challenge and uproot them. Often any mention of Britain or the royal family is cause for argument. Although she says she saw it as an opportunity to leverage the platform of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to reach a wide audience and bring more people to the conversation about racism and injustice and what is required of us to bring them to an end in these island nations.
She went on saying, they both addressed the elephant in the room and said exactly what we and so many others know. And that is part of the reason why the conversation was so groundbreaking. After all, the first item on the Caribbean community's 10-point reparations plan is the expectation of an apology from European nations. An apology is an admission of wrong, and by extension it commits the party to a process for repair. It carries weight. But apologies in this polite society are hard to come by. Theresa May, for example, when called upon to apologise for Britain's role in legislating against the LGBT community, alternatively issued a statement of regret.
Yeah, and we've seen that a few times, that like Charles and the Queen are very careful in their use of the word regrettable rather than issuing an apology. And, you know, obviously that Harry wasn't making an apology here either, but it's a start.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's putting pressure on other people in the family to at least consider saying something.
I think a lot of the conversation around this discussion and what Harry said was people saying, you know, he's attacking the Commonwealth, and what has the Commonwealth done wrong? The Commonwealth isn't the British Empire. We have previously talked about this. We spoke about a piece Afua Hirsch had written for The Guardian, which is really good if you haven't read it already, where she described the Commonwealth as basically Empire 2.0, but maybe you could give like a little more of an explainer on what the difference is between Commonwealth and British Empire.
Yeah, so according to the official Commonwealth website, the Commonwealth is one of the world's oldest political associations of states. Its roots go back to the British Empire, when countries around the world were ruled by Britain. So it is, I mean, you know, very much rooted in the British Empire, and it's come out of that. And it also was not an instant process in forming the Commonwealth. It was like a gradual shift from countries being under British rule to being what it is now, which is independent from any kind of allegiance to the British monarch. And also it's open to any country that wants to join. You don't have to have an association with the British Empire. So, for example, there's 54 states now, and the last two that joined were Mozambique and Rwanda, who both don't have any previous ties to the British Empire. It's about states supporting each other and fostering the development of smaller states as well, which just seemed like we were talking about some of the approaches that, say, Churchill had to countries that were or had been under British rule, and he certainly didn't have any qualms about punishing countries that he thought were like out of line. So this kind of idea of like fostering countries is very different from the British Empire.
And the Queen's dad, King George VI, was the first head of the Commonwealth, and then she became the head when he died. Although the British monarch is not automatically head of the Commonwealth, it just so happens that they have all been royals. Like the Commonwealth member countries choose who becomes the head, and Charles is the next one. So
yeah,
you wonder how much room there is there to maneuver.
Yeah, like to what extent is it really independent? But I suppose, you know, Harry wasn't criticising the Commonwealth, he was criticising the uncomfortable past that has led to the Commonwealth, and
which is on the official Commonwealth website.
Yeah,
he wasn't
exactly.
even saying anything outrageous there.
Well, talking about people who do say outrageous things, let's talk about Jessica Mulroney.
Yeah, just like a quick update on her. So you may remember that she is Meghan's good friend. We believe she's godmother to Archie. She got in a really ugly mess of her own making when she attacked a Canadian lifestyle blogger, Sasha Exeter, a black woman, on Instagram. And now the Sun has an exclusive that says Jessica thinks Meghan should have made some sort of public statement to defend her.
This is gross. I mean, it was like bad enough that Jessica was trying to use "I have a black friend" as an excuse to try and get her out of, like you said, the mess that she created. But now to go even further and say that my black friend should be standing up for me?
So Jessica's agents have been hosting a series of meetings with Hollywood power players over the past week, discussing how to rescue her career without Meghan's help. And someone with knowledge of the discussions told Dan Wootton at The Sun, Jessica's team have made it clear that she feels completely ditched by Meghan and fears she's going to cut her out of her life for good. She's completely distraught and devastated because Meghan has done nothing to stand up for her publicly. Jessica is terrified she will never work again. Meghan has forsaken her most loyal friend just to look woke.
Oh, oh my god.
This is an infuriating statement.
I hate it.
I'm pretty comfortable in saying this person is definitely white, making this statement. And I mean, I am wondering, is this a sign of things to come? You know, is it possible that this is coming from Jessica's team? Does this mean Jessica may have more to say about Meghan in the future? Is this some sort of nudge or some kind of message to Meghan that she's willing to talk to the tabloids and Meghan should be worried about that?
Well, there was a source as well in the Daily Mail who also wrote about this, who said, like, you know, a source close to Jessica Mulroney who said she's considering a book. So, I mean, that sounds like a threat to me.
I'd take all that with an enormous pinch of salt, but it's just interesting where this is going.
Yeah.
But people this week had a lot of feelings about this story of Prince Harry and Prince William agreeing to split the future proceeds from the Diana Memorial Fund between their charities. I'm really surprised about this because I feel like we heard about this ages ago, but
it also seems like super fucking obvious that this would happen.
The fund was originally set up in 1997 in the wake of Diana's death, and since 2013 it's been paid into the Royal Foundation, but like it hasn't been actively fundraising for years, although it does receive money from legacies and other donations, so there's a little bit coming in. And last year the Royal Foundation received around £21,000 from the Diana Fund according to its annual report, and in future Harry's portion will go to Sentebale.
I love that it's going to Sentebale. I love when you see Harry talking about Sentebale and at Sentebale events, because it has such a close link to his mother for him. He always speaks so passionately about it.
And Sentebale was part of the Royal Foundation before, so it's the same place the money was going before, I would assume. But all the conversation around this was that it was devastating that the brothers couldn't find somewhere to to donate the fund together. They couldn't do anything as a team. They're grown men. They don't have to do everything as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely an argument that, you know, supporting more places is in some ways better than putting all that money into one organisation.
Or if it's sent to ballet, it's probably getting the same money it got last year when it was part of the Royal Foundation as it is getting now that it's not part of the Royal Foundation. I really don't see what the fuss is about all of this. But the accounts also show that Kate and Will have hired another of Harry and Meghan's former staffers. Her name is Amy Pickerel. She was previously Meghan's assistant private secretary until March of last year. I think we talked about her because she worked with Meghan on the Together cookbook and also on the SmartWorks collection. And she went to the launch of the Smart Set after having left the team. But anyway, she's now working at the Royal Foundation as director of the Earthshot Prize.
Can you imagine the change of pace that she's experiencing?
Womp womp. Okay, back to the topic of brotherly rivalries, because this gives us a little in as we turn to our book club discussion of The Heir Affair by Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, the sequel to their 2015 novel, The Royal We.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, as we proceed, we are going to be talking about everything that happens in this book, so if you haven't read it yet, stop now.
Stop, go read it. I mean, it should kind of go without saying we're also going to be spoiling the first book as well, so if for some reason you haven't read that, just go read them both. They're very entertaining, so it's no hardship.
The Heir Affair picks up a few months after the ending of the first book, Royal We, and gradually fills us in on what has happened in the time that's elapsed. We learn that Clive, the evil reporter and former boyfriend of Bex, ran a story on Bex and Nick's wedding day, saying that Bex had slept with Nick's brother Freddie, and this resulted in thousands of people screaming slut at her and Nick as they were leaving Westminster Abbey after their wedding ceremony.
That was a wild scene.
Do you think that would happen? Like, I was thinking when we were at Windsor, there was no phone reception, so I wouldn't have been able to read this news story when it had broke. But if something like that did happen, the crowd didn't seem that vocal to me about anything, so I can't imagine anyone screaming slut.
It's definitely something that you've noticed and said to me when we've seen large crowds of British people at things, is how silent they are compared to other crowds in Ireland.
When we saw Victoria Beckham, and it was just deathly silent the whole way, except for me going, ah, like a fucking fangirl. But anyway, so Queen Eleanor is furious with Nick and Bex. After the ceremony, everyone is horrible to Bex, so the two of them decide to head off on their honeymoon and spend 2 months on the run, wearing ridiculous disguises and staying in Airbnbs around the UK. All the while, Clive keeps reporting nasty stories about them as royal reporter for The Sun. At this stage, he's moved up from the blog.
While they're on the run, Freddie is left behind to pick up the slack, and so he does a lot more work and loads of appearances with their father Richard, who seems even more keen than usual to get his bum on the throne.
Then Eleanor has a health scare that brings Bex and Nick back to Buckingham Palace and the life that they had been avoiding, as well as all the friends and family they had been avoiding that they hadn't contacted in 2 months, and everyone is really pissed with them.
Yeah, I thought it was wild that they hadn't told some of their closest friends where they were going. Like, imagine if, your best friends just disappeared for 2 months.
But from there, basically, the first half of the book deals with the Bex, Nick, Freddie love triangle and the fallout from that, and trying to rebuild that relationship and that trust, despite Bex's quite obvious love for Freddie and the very intense sibling rivalry between Nick and Freddie.
The second half of the book then explores the heir and the spare dynamic and the kind of issues of succession even further, because Bex has trouble getting pregnant, and this is made very clear that that's her main job as Duchess, and eventually she has to use Freddie as a sperm donor. Has to, because Eleanor says so.
Throughout Bex is investigating the secret history of Eleanor's dead sister Georgina, basically Princess Margaret, who was the former occupant of their apartment in Kensington Palace, and she's reading her old diaries and letters and stuff. And then the story culminates with Eleanor revealing Georgina's big secret, which is that Richard, the future king, was Georgina's son with Eleanor's husband Henry, and is not, in fact, next in line to the throne, which leaves Nick and Bex to decide whether to stay or go.
Also, Freddie ends up married to a Dutch princess called Daphne, and Nick and Bex have twins, and then decide to stay in the monarchy despite having complained about it a lot, and not tell the British public of all these lies that have built up.
So we'll get onto that in due course, but I thought we could start by maybe talking about, you know, the authors, Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, had spoken about how they were nervous about doing a second book because in the first romance, you establish the romance, and then in the second, you're like, where do we go from here? We can't break them up, we can't divorce them, so how do you do a sequel in that way? So what did you think of the Bex and Nick relationship in this book?
Well, they're both, like, very funny and interesting, or at least more funny and interesting than Will and Kate, who they're obviously based on. And I thought it was interesting that a lot of the, like, obstacles that are put in their way, which I guess is the way you do your sequel to a romance, is you test the relationship. But a lot of the obstacles they have to deal with are based on things that we have been at least rumoured to have happened to Will and Kate.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest parts is the press attention, and we have a few of those kind of real life royal situations seemingly playing out in the book, like the never complain, never explain coming up a few times, the tabloid press polarising the public into fans or critics. You have a very invasive topless photo scandal, and of course you have the evil reporter Clive popping up and saying, you in the palace, me in the press, writing fawning stories, you could have planted anything you wanted.
Yeah, hinting at this, like, incredible relationship they could have had with the tabloids if only they'd played along.
I think it's interesting, like, early on after Bex and Nick return from their long honeymoon, and they're very conscious of their first public appearance, that they know people are going to be paying a lot of attention and scrutiny to their body language, and they know they need to put on a show. And, like, we've talked about that in relation to, you know, the Christmas walk with the Sussexes and the Cambridges in real life, or most recently the Commonwealth Day service, that we're like, you guys have to put on a show, or don't you think about that? But here, they pay so much attention to that. They are constantly reading the newspapers, constantly reading online blogs, and, like, reading all the comments and everything. I did like there's a moment where they're talking about, like, the craziest stuff they've seen on blogs, and Nick talks about a blogger who was talking about his trousers being too wide and using all caps a lot, and I thought that was definitely a reference to the Go Fuck Yourself website, because they do that all the time. It's so funny. But let's talk about the topless photo scandal, because that's got very clear parallels to real life.
Yeah, the parallel is, of course, the photos that were taken of Kate Middleton when they were on holiday in France. And I saw the parallel, but I thought that the situation was so different. And, you know, in this, Bex and Nick are on a royal tour. They are working. Yes, they're on a cable car by themselves, but it just seemed like really poor judgment on their part.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that was on their official itinerary. They're technically still on the clock when they're doing it. I also thought it was quite unusual that she still did the tour of the 9/11 memorial.
Yeah.
The same day that the topless photos were on the front page of the New York Post. I just wasn't sure if that would really go ahead in real life. It seemed like it would be perhaps bringing quite negative attention to a very somber occasion. But I was intrigued by the infidelity storyline, as I'm sure you were too.
Yes, I loved this storyline. So after Bex's kiss was blown up into a big full-blown affair in the first book, in this book, Nick goes to an aristocratic woman's house for a party full of toffs and aristos, which seemed to bear some resemblance to the turnip toffs of Norfolk, and it is leaked that he had sex with the host of this party, Annabel Farthing.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't get over that he went to this New Year's Eve party without inviting his wife and didn't think that there would be negative fallout.
So they're not getting on, it's Christmas. She says, go and see your mother. Go and clear your head, go and do something for you. Assuming that he's then going to come back like the next day or that night or whatever, and he stays away for a week around Christmas time. Not a good husband look.
At all. And I guess with the Annabelle Farthing thing, like you say, there's very clear shades of the turnip toffs in that social set. And, you know, we're obviously going to draw parallels with the Rose Hanbury, the Marchioness of Cholmondeley rumours that were surrounding Will last year. And I mean, I think it was a really carefully done storyline, because if you do not believe that the real life Will was unfaithful to the real life Kate, then the book allows for that possibility while still showing the damage of all of the aftermath and the extenuating circumstances around it. So even though Nick allegedly only kissed this woman, that she made a pass at him and he turned her down, it is, like you say, blown up into this huge thing, and he doesn't say anything to correct the people who believe that he slept with her. So what he does is, the following New Year's Eve, he brings Bex with him to the same party and parades her around in front of everyone to show
same people
that their marriage is solid and that he wasn't being unfaithful. And I think they have such a good argument about this afterwards. And I have to say, I just love the way Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan write arguments. I think in their first book they did such compelling arguments between Bex and Nick and Bex and Lacey, and that happens again in this book with Bex and Nick and Freddie. And it's exactly how you dream an argument will work out, like that you'll really hold your own and say all the right things. And I feel like Bex always does that. Like, I loved in this scene where she's saying to him, like, I'm not just a prop, how could you do this to me? How could you parade me in front of these people without telling me that there was even this rumor? And I thought it was very nicely done, that, you know, that's how you'd like to imagine Kate would respond.
Yeah, I thought it was like you say, really well done argument. I think that Bex is in danger of forgiving a little too easily.
Yeah, anytime he shows the slightest vulnerability, you have the bit where she says, my heart cracked, and straight away,
yeah,
all is forgiven.
Just a glimpse of those forearms.
But let's talk about the fertility storyline, because I guess we knew this was going to be part of it, but straight away there is a lot of pressure on Bex to get pregnant. And it starts with Richard bringing it up in a speech and basically opening the floodgates then for everyone to start speculating. Is she pregnant? When's she going to get pregnant? Bump watch, basically, as they call it. And the royal family really lays it on thick. Like, they tell her, no duty of yours is more important than delivering this family its next heir, which to me would make me want to jump off a cliff.
Yeah, and I mean,
this is why you don't marry into the monarchy, of course.
Absolutely. And so once Richard kind of kicks off all the speculation by this kind of manipulative comment, the rest of the country, just like
the world
jumps on board. You get like a game show host making jokes about her getting sprogged up in the new year, and like tabloid coverage, of course, like Us Magazine reporting when her mum is in the baby aisle at Target,
even though she was actually getting something for her friend's granddaughter.
Yeah.
And then you have like Clive writing a piece that Nick's got to get a paternity test to make sure any kid is really his, and she talks about everyone analysing her weight. Like, is she too thin to get pregnant? Has she gained weight? Does that mean she's getting pregnant, or is she just bloated? There's just so much pressure on her, and I think they covered that idea of like bump watch and like the media bump watch really well, because I would imagine that would be like suffocating coming from all angles. And like she says, it's not like she can invite everyone to watch her eat soft cheeses and just rule it out once and for all. But I did think it was a little bit strange that she says at one point that she never even thought about having kids until a year into their marriage. She starts to think, oh, are we going to have kids? Like, surely that is something that you discuss with your partner, whoever they are, before you even get engaged.
Yeah.
It's just naive as well, if you're marrying the future king, to think your duty is going to involve being a baby machine.
Yeah, of course.
When she does find herself unexpectedly pregnant, though, I thought that scene was very nicely done. That she describes how her primary emotion is terror. She's thinking it's too soon, we're not ready, but that she's not allowed to think any of that. And the way she puts it to Nick is she says, "It's been made very clear to me that having a baby is one of my primary responsibilities. I don't get to not be ready. There isn't room for me to have complicated feelings about it because my jurisdiction is pretty much ended." Which I really felt for her.
Yeah, it was really it was a broadside. I felt like, God, she's absolutely got no say in this. And in addition to worrying about being pregnant or having kids, she's got to worry about making this moment special for Nick and, for the rest of the family as well.
Yeah, and you got a sense of it a little bit in the first book when she talked about dieting and everybody paying a lot of attention to what she was eating and exercising and stuff like that. But I guess just this feeling that your body isn't your own anymore would be just really crushing. Especially
as, we've had a lot, in the first book, but also in this one, about her Duchess costume and that she encases herself in tights and puts in hair extensions, and you get this, it's almost like an assault from the outside in terms of putting these things on and changing what she looks like and monitoring that. And then with this you get a sense that right, this is inside as well, monitoring her womb. And then when she has the miscarriage, I thought that was incredibly sad, but very sensitively handled. And from there, her struggles with IVF, and I thought they were very careful in how they told that story. And Heather Cox, one of the authors, said a lot of what Bex goes through in the book is a slightly altered version of what I went through. It wasn't as much needing to research as being able to be I remember how that felt, or I remember when we did that and that happened and it sucked. It felt like a very therapeutic way to sort or pour out some of the emotions of that whole experience and how challenging it can be, and all the ways you feel in conflict with your body as you're going through it. It felt grueling, going on that journey with her, with Bex. Yeah, her and Nick do have some really nice moments in the book, like that scene where they're in America and he takes her to Chicago to go to the baseball game. I thought was really sweet, and that was a genuinely romantic moment that you could really enjoy. But then there were moments where I feel like he really let her down. I thought he was definitely not sympathetic enough when Clive runs the story saying that Bex is barren and unable to bear the heir that history and hereditary monarchy demands. That he can't tell that would be something that would be really devastating for her to hear, given what she's experiencing, and that he says something like, "That's rubbish." That's not enough. Especially as I think it's at that point that they're trying to divert the story about his affair, or his alleged affair. Yeah. So he's part of the reason why they can't have kids, or having difficulty having kids. But also the whole PR exercise, which involves throwing his younger brother under the bus, and this piece about Bex, is because something that he did and something that he allowed to continue to happen and continue to be believed. And he allows his brother and his wife to be used as human shields for him in that instance. But I thought as well, later you learned that Bex was going to the fertility clinic every 2 days. Yeah. For that whole time where she was trying to get pregnant, and she was going alone. And it just is so depressing to think that getting pregnant was her full-time job, and is basically the only job she does in this book. Would you agree that at times it feels like she's doing it more because that's her job rather than because she's desperate to have kids? You do get this scene where, because Lacey also has a baby, and you do get this scene where she is holding Lacey's baby and she says, "This is much harder than I thought it was going to be. I wish I could keep you." And that's the kind of moment where you get the sense that she does really want a child of her own. But I think all of that would just really be clouded by the pressure from her family. Eleanor, the Queen, is a complete bitch to her about it, saying that if you don't produce some heirs, I'm going to be enormously cross. And it's just not the kind of supportive environment that you want or need. Yeah, and also I suppose as well, when they're discussing their options, Bex seems to be very open to the possibility of adoption rather than going through this long and grueling process. Their attitude to adoption really made me angry. Yeah. But we don't have to get into that. We should talk a little bit about
Bex and Freddie. So, like, one of the issues in Bex and Nick's relationship is that Freddie is checking out and getting involved with somebody else and eventually getting married. And this, I think, is a really interesting thing to look at, obviously, in light of the real life Harry, Will and Kate situation, but also because of how they've developed that in this series with the Freddie and Bex relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of stuff going on with Freddie. You know, obviously there's his kind of romantic moving on, but also in general, like, he grows up, he steps up, he takes the brunt of the work that he's doing while they're away. He gets more respect from their dad. He grows up, and I think in the first book, part of Freddie's appeal is that Nick is the one who's bound by duty, and Bex knows that a life with Nick is about that duty. Freddie is the fuck up, but now he's not that, so Bex has to deal with that as well.
I love Bex as a character, and I really enjoy reading her, and I'm sad when it comes to an end, but I thought it was very smart how they developed her character by making her quite selfish in this second book, and how clearly she wants to keep Freddie for herself, both as a friend and a confidant and as a sort of second boyfriend, and also as a kind of crutch for Nick in his royal duties to take some of the heat off him without actually giving him anything that he wants. So she's all take.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hated how dismissive she was of poor Daphne.
Yeah, I really liked Daphne. And, I mean, Bex was so desperate for Freddie to find what she defined as love, and was very, like you say, dismissive of what he found with Daphne.
And I think part of that is that the longer it takes him to do that, the longer he stays around in close proximity to her.
And the longer he's in proximity to her, the harder it is for him to find what he has with Bex with someone else. Why would he? Because he's got her.
But the rivalry with Daphne is really ugly. There's a few scenes where she was sort of trying to rub it in Daphne's face, her connection with Freddie, and like when Daphne comes to see him and she says like, oh, he's always like this, and Bex is like, well, he's home now, so we can all keep tabs on him, and like very territorial. And as well, like there's a bit where Bex feels herself becoming uncomfortable with how close Daphne and Freddie are, and she's like, I couldn't put my finger on why.
Because you love him and he loves you. And I mean, there is definitely a big part of me that is like, Bex and Freddie are the OTP.
I know, I felt that as well, especially in this one where it seemed like they just had so much more of a connection.
Yeah.
And they were able to talk about things when Nick wasn't around, and that they could go and they could be vulnerable and open with each other, and also have fun in a way that I felt like we weren't really getting with Bex and Nick.
Because we got so many bits of, you know, Nick behaving really badly, and then you don't just have Freddie as like the fun one, but because he's maturing and trying to figure himself out and what he wants, like that's also a really attractive quality. And you're like, oh, like he could be working on himself and turning himself into the perfect man for her. Like, you know, I never thought that that Bex and Nick were going to break up and that she was going to end up with Freddie, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't hoping for it for most of the book.
I hated the conversation that the three of them have, where Freddie's talking about how he feels like he's on his own, and she's like, you're not, you're with us.
We're a tricycle.
And he's like, oh, a lifetime of being a third wheel. And the other two are trying to sort of comfort him and being like, without one of us, the other two would fall over. And he's like, I know that it's 2 and 1. It's not 3. We're not a 3 anymore.
Nobody wants to be the stabilizer to somebody else's relationship.
I know, it's just so condescending. But I guess that brings us into the Freddie and Nick relationship. And like, we talk about this. We love talking about the heir and the spare relationship. We talk about it a lot in American Royals and stuff like that as well. But in the first half of the book, it's really the focus.
Yeah, and you get, I mean, something that we've talked about in relation to Harry and Will. We felt that once Harry and Meghan came on the scene and stepped up their workload, that prompted Will and Kate to also step up their workload. What we get in the Heir Affair is Nick and Freddie literally trying to one-up each other in terms of the number of charitable commitments they can make and the number of fundraisers, the number of unveilings, the number of anything.
Guest books they sign, yeah.
Yeah. And
this petty little feud.
And it really exposed them as considering charity work as very much removed from the people that they're meant to be helping and much more a box-ticking exercise or like the only thing. Yeah, a game, yeah.
And yeah, you have that where they're boasting about how their father gave them different patronages. Nick's like, oh, well, he gave me the Imperial War Museums. And Freddie's like, oh, well, he gave me the British Society for Early Childhood Development. And when he suggests that they could work together, Nick's like, that'd be fantastic, assuming our Lyme disease schedule allows. It's just like, these two.
Yeah.
There's another bit where Freddie is meant to open the little curtains to unveil a portrait and Nick jumps in at the last minute and does it. It's just so childish. And I have a feeling that Will and Harry could be like that in real life as well.
Yeah.
I liked the bit where Nick is talking and he gets actually quite spiteful and he says to Bex of Freddie, I used to want our old relationship back, but now I want the public to see what it's got in me. And you get a sense of the kind of ego there of, you know, the future king and not wanting to be overshadowed by anyone.
Yeah, and I mean, because that old relationship is based on the fact that Freddie was no threat to him in terms of being taken seriously. And once he realises that this is the new world order, this is Freddie as someone who like wants things and is prepared to, I'm not going to say work incredibly hard because he's still a royal, but, you know, prepared to do some work. So now Nick gets very self-pitying.
We were talking earlier about when the rumours of the affair are about to break and they go to B, their friend, and their private secretary, and she says she's going to take care of it. And even though she is private secretary for Nick and Freddie and Bex, all three of them, she uses Freddie as a human shield, like we said earlier, and leaks his not romance with Daphne as a way to get Clive to avoid publishing the story about the affair. And this really taps into that speculation that a lot of people had, that Harry and Meghan were allegedly being used as a kind of shield to protect Will's affair rumours. And I think that was a really juicy little parallel.
But I liked as well with that the sense that if there is a changing of staff or like splitting of offices and things like that, like it's not necessarily to do with the relationship between those royal members, but it's more to do with the fact that the staff are going to protect their ultimate employer. Like the line of succession is also a line of hierarchy in terms of who gets the most attention and who gets the most protection.
It really didn't seem to me like Nick and Bex had that much of a problem with it, though.
No, it's true, yeah.
And it's Freddie who's the one that says, you're meant to work for me, but this isn't working for me. This was putting them first. What did you think of the kind of eventual reconciliation between Nick and Freddie then?
I thought it was very interesting because essentially what prompts their reconciliation is Nick putting his arms around Freddie and letting him cry, and them actually not using words to try and reconcile, but more like being there for each other in the most literal sense. And we only, last week had confirmation that Will had said that he would not put his arms around Harry anymore. So this scene was kind of like, maybe everything could have been healed if they just had a hug earlier. And, you know, I'm not 100% against that idea. These people are meant to be very concerned with mental health and the importance of supporting people. And I think that was what this was. That was Nick saying without words that he would support him and not try and pull focus and try and explain himself.
And practicing what he preaches. Like in this book, mental health is his primary focus in work, and he gets therapy and stuff like that. And you can see him enacting what he has learned in therapy and in his work. But okay, let's move on to Freddie and Daphne, because I mean, I think maybe we could start by looking at what the authors have said about the Daphne character, or the fact that she's not Meghan Markle, basically.
Heather Cox said, we made a really conscious and long reasoned choice not to have a Meghan Markle in the book. And a really big part of that was when we were trying to decide what to do about the book, we were like, well, how do we want to tackle Meghan? Someone on Twitter had said, if you're a writer, specifically a white writer, if there's a story you want to write, sit down and really ask yourself, why are you the person to write that story? Here's the thing, why are we the people to write the Meghan Markle story? They're not the people to write the Meghan Markle story, and I think that introducing somebody brand new into this book, they would have to write that story from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think if you were going to have a non-white person marry into the royal family, you'd want to hear it from their perspective, not Bex's.
And there certainly isn't room in this book to tell that story as well as everything else that goes on.
Yeah, at the same time, though, I thought they did Daphne a disservice. I think she comes across as such a sad sack, such a pitiable creature.
Yeah, and I agree that she's pretty pitiable. I wonder, like, if that's partly because we see her through Bex's eyes so much. But, because, I mean, like I said, I liked her, and I suppose that's why.
Did you like her because you felt sorry for her? Because I think that's why I liked her. Like,
Yeah,
immediately when
could
she's
be.
introduced, it's like she's still traumatized from being kidnapped.
Yeah.
So you feel sympathetic towards her, and then it's, oh, she's going to spend the rest of her life as second best.
Yeah. What I liked in the storyline, I suppose, was this kind of return to a very traditional royal wedding scenario. This is what you use the spare for. This is the role of the spare, is to be married off in a political marriage somewhere where you can unite different bloodlines.
And Bex hammers on about how this is a marriage of practicality, not passion. As she says, their relationship was fresh, untarnished, uncomplicated. Heat is wonderful until it burns you. She genuinely loves Nick, and I do think they did a really nice job of telling their love story in the first book, but I felt really torn in this one and really was, like you were saying, drawn to her and Freddie getting together. And I really didn't like how Bex reacts around Daphne, and you know, she kind of has these sort of bitter inner thoughts where she thinks like Freddie's acting more like a bodyguard than a doting bridegroom.
But that really had the opposite effect on me, because I thought he was way sexier once he was described as a bodyguard. I mean, after reading American Royals, after watching The Bodyguard, you know, like, being bodyguard is sexy. Sorry.
Very good, Mum. Thank you, Mum. Mum. Pleasure to meet you, Mum. Can't say for certain, Mum. Mum.
And also, Bex is so pessimistic in that final exchange she has with Daphne the night before the wedding, when she is talking to her, and as Daphne's speaking, Bex is thinking of Eleanor and how Eleanor thought that she could love her husband Henry enough for the both of them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, Bex is our perspective, and you can't expect her to not have any thoughts about somebody else's relationship, but, like, she really judges their relationship by her own standards.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's like brilliantly done. I think it's really realistic.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that is how you would feel in that position. But I still think they did Daphne dirty. But I what I loved was the final scene between Bex and Freddie, and that, like, actually made me cry a little bit. It was very emotional, where it's the day of the wedding and she goes to give him a gift, which is a kind of mirror of the gift that Nick gave her in the first book, the flag pin with the British flag and the American flag, and she gives Freddie a British flag and a Dutch flag, and he is very moved by it, and he tells her,
"It is ever so hard to go, and that's why I have to. Our bond has never just been about sex or love for me. I've been so emotionally dependent on being able to talk to you, to have you in my family and in my life. Not very many people have known me as well as you do. Maybe no one has. But it can be hard to untangle all those things. So even though that chapter is behind us."
and she says, "It still has to change. I know. Daphne has to be that person for you."
She finally gets it.
But you know what I mean? Like, it has, like, great, like, realism to it, I think.
You mentioned realism there. Let's talk about something which was, to my mind, very unrealistic. And that is Eleanor's personality change as a result of a coma.
Eleanor is such a big part of this book, and she starts out, to me, like a very cartoon British villain. Like, she's using the sort of language that American people think English people use all the time, saying, like, she's a harlot, she's a trollop. And you have, I think it's Nancy, Bex's mom, saying she's acting like a mob boss or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is very much how she's acting at the start. But as well, I thought it was good the bit when Bex goes to visit her after she's had her heart problem and she's in bed. And Eleanor's giving her the silent treatment, but she speaks through her accessories.
That was really good. Like the pocket watch that was made in Coventry. They note that being sent to Coventry was a British expression for being iced out.
Yeah, this is very the kind of fan fiction people write about the Queen's wardrobe.
It's like so subtle and specific. I love it.
So then Eleanor has a stroke and she's in a coma. And while she's in a coma, Bex is one of her most regular visitors because she never does any work. So she has all the time in the world to go hang out with Eleanor. And then when Eleanor finally wakes up, she decides she's got to make a change and she enlists Bex to help her have fun.
Yeah, I mean, aren't her like first words like "fuck off" or something?
Yeah.
She wakes up and she's this like foul-mouthed, fun-seeking old broad, and she comes out of the coma with a like full personality transplant, which apparently is what's needed to make the royal family a welcoming place for an American person.
I know, and so the two of them, Bex and Eleanor, bond over baseball because Bex decides to teach her the rules and stuff, and they get really into it, and we have lots of scenes of them watching baseball games together, and those to me were just like total fan fiction.
Yeah.
And I know basically the whole book is fan fiction of a certain kind, but that to me just took it into like a fan service kind of like silliness that I thought was too much for me. And I did think when I was reading it, like, Americans would probably love this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I did think the moment where they watch a game in the palace screening room and Bex sees that Eleanor has bought a coucherator, the invention that made her dad rich, and has put it in the screening room, like filled with American sweets and stuff. I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice moment, and like that was unexpected for me. I felt like I was getting into the rhythm of this like kind of fan service-y kind of Queen dialogue, but that took me by surprise and I really liked it.
That scene though went on way too long. Like,
really? You don't love baseball?
I felt like I was getting a play-by-play of the game, and I don't know anything about baseball, don't want to know anything about baseball, but, you know, I'm not the American audience for this book, so I can understand that wasn't for me. I have to say the scene at the bar after Lacey's wedding also was too silly for me.
When she turns up and wants a tequila and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was a slight antidote to that, though, then when it came out that she actually was there because she wanted photos to be leaked to kind of show that she was strong enough to leave the palace and that Richard's regency should come to an end soon.
Yeah, I did think that was a good way of reframing it, but just those scenes are quite long and they felt to me like an SNL skit of like, what if the Queen had a dirty mouth and like, loved drinking and whatever. I mean, she does love drinking, but you know, it just felt like a little bit over the top. I have to say though, the twist at the funeral when she goes to like kiss her mother's cheek in the coffin and says, "I forgive you, but I'll never forget," is very good drama. Yeah. Very soapy, very good moment.
I mean, for all their cutesy hangout moments, Eleanor does really turn on Bex once the issue of fertility comes up.
Yeah, and just in general, like, after this period of, like, fluffy, frothy bonding between the two of them, things take a really dark turn. So, like, this kind of overlaps that we wanted to talk about. I think both of our big problem with this book was the Georgina storyline, the Princess Margaret character, and you know, when Bex and Nick move into their apartment in Kensington Palace, Bex is like admiring all the crap everywhere, which is like basically the spoils of empire packed into this apartment. We say apartment, it has like 26 rooms or something like that. But
27 once you include sex then.
But so she finds this seemingly unfinished love letter, and to me straight away I was like, okay, Georgina was in love with Henry, Eleanor's husband. This is where this is going. But it took forever to get there, and when Bex eventually does find out the letter was to Henry and she says it to Eleanor like really plays it cool, and it's only later when they discover the response from Henry and intimate photos of Georgina and Henry that they confront Eleanor about it, and that Richard is actually Georgina's son and all of that. And the Queen admits that she manipulated Bex into a relationship to find out what she knew about all this.
Which she didn't need to reveal.
I mean, I think she did, because it was an incredible twist. I gasped. I was like, I feel betrayed. You know, I sat through that really long baseball scene that I was meant to think was really cute, and the whole time you were manipulating her.
I liked that. I was surprised by it, but I was like, good surprised. I was
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, she's like, this is the Eleanor I know.
It like paid off.
Yeah.
I did think the ensuing argument there was the weakest one in the book, though, sadly.
Yeah, especially, you know, it was a really pivotal one. It was something that everything had been leading up to, and I wish it had been like landed a little better.
Yeah, it just didn't really ring true to me, and I think there were a few aspects to that. Like, Eleanor went back to being the cartoonish villain again.
And Richard has always been a really cartoonish figure, and he's just not in these books enough to suddenly have him in, I think, that kind of argument.
Yeah, because I think his character is meant to be kind of shadowy and you don't know him, and then suddenly to have him expose like his like deepest emotions and his response to this. I also thought there were like a few like cliched lines in it, like when Nick says, "This isn't a game, this is our lives."
Yeah,
it was like the movie version.
There was one good point though that Richard makes, which is he says to Eleanor, "If you love this country, how can you bake a deception like this into its DNA?"
I know, and that was a very strong point, something that stayed with me, that made me think I knew where the book was going to go from here.
Yeah.
That I was thinking, wow, is this book actually going to, like, abolish the monarchy?
It doesn't. When they have Richard run off and only communicate in GIFs, I found that, again, very hard to believe. Like, we don't know much about this guy, but I don't believe he would suddenly start sending Big Lebowski GIFs.
Yeah, that really tested the limits of credibility, and it was frustrating because like I love the humor in these books, and I do enjoy that, like, they're often very funny, but that was one of the moments where I was like, take this seriously.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the ending.
Yeah, okay. So, like we said, it turns out Richard is not the heir that he thinks he is, and actually, technically, the crown should pass to Edwin, who is like a ridiculous kind of like
Prince Edward.
Without
all the asshole qualities.
Yeah. But he's just like a bumbling fool, and I don't think they even tell him about any of this. So there's a decision made, like Richard, after going off and only communicating gifts for a while, decides that he's not going to run away from what he has been told is his duty for his whole life. He's going to become king when Eleanor dies. But he gives that decision as well to Nick. He says, you don't have to be the next king after me, you can leave.
Yeah, I don't really know what would happen in that case, but the option is there for them, and in the end both of them decide to stay. And I thought we could look a little bit at their reasoning. So Richard's reasoning, he says, abdicating would be a slap in the face to Mother, but also to my first mother, talking about both Eleanor and Georgina. And then he says, of the monarchy, we may not have much to do by way of actual decision making, but we still carry 1,000 years of history on our backs. The monarchy may be deemed outmoded and swept aside one day, but if that does happen, it cannot be because I threw it away. To me, it just seems like this would be the out for him that he needs, because then he could divorce Emma and go marry whoever he wants and not have to do this incredibly lonely job alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they seem to make such a point of the crown laying such heavy responsibility and ruining people's lives and making it so difficult for them to know who they are and what their purpose is. And then suddenly, when they're given the chance to get rid of it all. They decide not to. So,
and as well as that, they put so much emphasis on what Georgina would want and how she sacrificed everything so that I could be in this position. And like, none of them really know that.
Yeah.
And when he's saying this would be a slap in the face to Georgina, I don't think it would at all.
I mean...
It doesn't even matter.
Well, yeah, it doesn't really matter. But also, I mean, the way I read the Georgina stuff was that, like, she wanted Henry to leave Eleanor and they could run away and raise their kids together. So that was what I took away from it. You know, I'm sure there were, like, different ways of reading that storyline. But yeah, I didn't buy the Georgina reasoning. Nick says running off wouldn't actually let them escape anything. The scandal would always chase their family. We're in a similar position, and now that I'm seeing these two in front of me, I don't know if I can do it to them.
Which, like, in my mind translates as, this is easier. And it felt like such a cop-out to me.
Yeah.
And again, them, because when he's saying the them there, he's talking about Georgina and Henry. And again, like, basically putting words in her mouth or thinking that he knows what would have happened to her when nobody can know what would have happened. And I think as well, like, when Beck says it would be such a shit show.
Yeah.
I honestly, I find it hard not to read that as a commentary on Harry and Meghan, especially in light of some of the things that the Faux Girls have said about Harry and Meghan's move to LA on Instagram and stuff like that. And even though they note in the acknowledgements that the draft was finished in November of last year and no parts of the book were altered as a commentary on or reaction to subsequent or current royal events, at the same time, it just seemed to me that stood out.
Yeah, and that's how it's so hard to read it as anything else, really.
But when Nick as well says of the twins, being infamous wouldn't be any easier for them than being famous. It could be rather worse. To me, that, again, I was like, you coward.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine anything worse than being twins with someone and the person who was born seconds before me or after me is in the heir or spare role. That just makes the heir and spare dynamic even more fraught.
Yeah.
And that you have an opportunity to take your kids out of that and allow them to be raised as equals. Which they should be, especially as twins, where that's going to be even more complicated. So I didn't buy that line.
I also really didn't buy their, what seemed to be almost instantaneous forgiveness of Eleanor after a brief bit of anger. But yeah, they basically forgive her all her manipulation. And Nick definitely makes it sound like they're staying out of respect to her and her, like, long life of service and all the troubles that she's seen. And they want to avoid adding another traumatic chapter to her life, as he puts it.
I mean, I just didn't like this ending scene, and I didn't like the exchange that Bex and Eleanor have, where Eleanor's like, you know, I made it sound like I was manipulating you, but actually our relationship did mean something to me. And she says it in that way of, like, a very stiff, stuffy British kind of way that I would imagine Americans find very endearing, that, oh, British people can't show their true emotions.
It's kind of Maggie Smith, Downton Abbey style.
Yeah, and then it's up to Bex to be like, I love you too. And it's just a bit... no thanks.
yeah. I felt like at that point, really what Eleanor had done and what she was asking them to do was really inexcusable and unforgivable.
At that point then, she says, the throne is only weak when the wrong person sits on it. A direct line matters less than a solid one.
I have so much that I hate about this statement. One, every person who sits on a throne is the wrong person to sit on the throne because there's no reason for them to sit on it other than when they were born. But this line that a direct line matters less than a solid one, where was this reasoning back on the train when she was insisting that they use Freddie's sperm to fertilise Bex's eggs because they couldn't adopt, they couldn't use a sperm donor who's outside the royal family? If that doesn't matter, which is apparently what Eleanor really believes, if all that matters is the appearance of it being a solid thing, who the fuck cares who's the father of this baby? But yeah, I mean, I certainly would have been really angry if I was Freddie. Having to be the biological father of Bex's kid puts, like, a huge amount of strain, and he says that that's part of the reason why he needs to be in a different country to them.
I thought we could maybe look at what the authors have said about their own interest in the monarchy. You guys know we're obsessed with, like, why Americans are interested in the monarchy. And so Jessica Morgan said, it's interesting to think about what it would be like to be born into a family that's got so much history and is so rich and so complicated. Just being thrust into it without any choice of your own is a very interesting, fertile ground. But also I think for Americans, the British royal family isn't politicised the way it is in the UK. My taxes don't go to pay for them. The way they're taught in schools and covered in the media here it's the longest running soap opera any of us have ever followed. Going back to Henry VIII and his many wives, we're taught as consumers of culture in America to view them as a soap opera, and they are pretty dramatic.
And I can sort of understand why. I don't think this book has a publisher in the UK at the moment.
Not at the moment.
Which, I'm sure it will. But like, it shows the market that they're prioritising, and that makes a lot of sense when you're reading it, especially for me as a British person. I know that a lot of the things that, like the Eleanor stuff that I didn't really like so much about this book come as a specific result of me being British and my relationship with the royal family.
But I think, and I agree, obviously, as an Irish person and as an anti-monarchist,
Yeah.
I'm not the audience for this book, although I did really enjoy it. But I am interested in, I think one of the things both of us felt is that there's too much in this book.
Yeah.
And they have too much going on, and it becomes almost as if they lose control of their many plots.
Yeah.
And by the end, you're kind of, you feel like you've been reading this for so long and so much has happened and there's just too much to process. And I feel like there would have been a really, really excellent book in here if you took out all the Georgina and the succession drama stuff, because that would have allowed you to really explore the love triangle and the fertility and the whole implications of the sperm donor situation, which was very thorny and fascinating and really juicy and soapy and all that stuff. But the fact that you bring in this succession drama, which really taps into what is the meaning and the purpose of a monarchy, means you're wading into territory that, from what they've said about it, they aren't particularly interested in or engaged with. On its own, I think that would be a fascinating story, but the way it's rushed here and just reduced to the soapy elements, and I'm saying that as somebody who loves soapy elements, that it takes away from the impact of that and means that it feels tacked on, and in that way reduces the impact of all the other really good stories.
Yeah, I mean, there's too much at stake in a story about the line of succession, and I like Bex, and I like Nick as well, even though it sounded like I didn't like him from when I was talking about him earlier. But I didn't like their decision that they made at the end, and I'm annoyed that that's what I was left with.
But I just wonder why they had to make that decision at all, because as I was saying, I reread the book just before I read this one, and there's so much in that about Nick really feeling sorry for himself and wishing that he didn't have to have this role. And I'm sure, every monarch feels that way. It's not an exclusive thing that he feels, but he does have the option. And the fact that they don't, and it's a decision they make, I feel very hastily, and right after having babies, which is a huge life change, and trying to make 2 life changes in that circumstance is just too much to ask of somebody. But I just wonder, what was the purpose in having that storyline at all, other than to load up more soap on a really soapy story. But I thought, okay, so we have some problems with the ending, but...
Can I tell you my biggest problem with the ending?
Yes, Tom.
Okay, so something that we haven't talked about is the fact that Nick learns to knit over the course of this book, and that he's really bad at it, and it's kind of a running joke. It's quite an endearing character trait that he has. And then the babies are born, they're looking through the window at them, they're wearing little knitted caps, and Nick didn't knit the fucking caps? You did a whole storyline about him learning to knit, and he didn't knit anything for his fucking babies?
Tom is a knitter, so...
And, I mean, I know that they came early, but come on, be prepared, man. It doesn't take that long to knit a little hat for a little baby. I just thought it was missing out on, what could have been a really heartwarming moment.
Yes, I agree with you there. I do want to talk about the other characters in the book, because I feel like they're such a part of the first book, and in this book it's so much about Eleanor that a lot of the other characters fall down to a much more supporting role even more supporting than they were in the first book. But I think the most notable for me was Lacey.
Oh, who's a different character in this?
Basically, she is way more boring, more worthy, like has way less of a personality, doesn't feel like she has that close relationship with Bex that they have in the first book. Like the birthdays were such a big thing in the first book about them always having to be together at midnight, and obviously you're not going to do that as you grow up, but it just felt like they grew so far apart, and she didn't kind of think about that or process that as much as they were focused on the Nick and Freddie relationship, that the Lacey and Bex relationship is equally integral to the story.
Especially as Bex spends a lot of this book on her own, kind of sorting through stuff in their flat. And you would have thought, you know, given that there's a time difference, there's a geographical difference between her and Lacey, that like there could have been opportunity for that to be like, you know, Bex is in the middle of the day sorting through piles of stuff. Lacey's getting ready for bed after like a long day. They're on Zoom, for example, and that they could be chatting. And you know, there's so much going on for Bex emotionally and in terms of all these relationships. And we're told that her relationship with Lacey is a lot better now than it was in the first book, but we don't really get to see that through conversations that they have.
As well as that, Scylla is really sidelined. I feel like she goes to work for Richard instead of working for Bex, and we barely see her then after that, and the same with Gaz. The only friend we do get more of is Bea, who is really not my favourite. Lady Bollocks, another very American joke about British names, but I really didn't like her in the first book. I felt like they kind of overplayed their hand and made her way too much of a bitch when she was introduced, and I think that kind of like, you know, really upper class snootiness can be very funny and charming to maybe Americans or people outside of Britain or who don't know people like that, but that very flagrant class snobbery is extremely off-putting to me.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the Bake Off stuff with Gaz?
No.
I felt like, you know, I've heard that Bake Off got really big in America.
Yeah, they love it.
So, like, I can see why they brought that in as, like, another thing, another reason to love Gaz, because I know he's, like, a fan favourite. And I really like Gaz. Again, I suppose I would have liked to see supporting characters be supportive characters. That's what I'm saying. Which I think that everyone seems to be missing a friend in this.
I do think like there is more Nancy, like Bex's mother, and she has some really nice kind of tender moments with Bex. Like I liked the scene where Bex goes to visit her in Iowa and they talk about the Freddie donor situation, and she's kind of reluctant. She obviously doesn't want to let Freddie go, and her mother is the one who says like, you have to take him at his word and no, he wants to do this and let him go. It did make me wonder why neither of the babies' names had any Nancy in them or anything related to Bex's family. It was all about...
Yeah, especially as, you know, with everything they went through having these kids, like, you could think it's probably unlikely they're going to have more kids, or unlikely that they would assume that they would have more kids. So you'd think they would want to represent both families in the naming of these twins.
And I feel like a lot of thought went into these names, and it was interesting that one of them was called Margaret, given the nod to Margaret Regina. But two of the other characters that I had a problem with were Agatha and Elizabeth. So Agatha is the Princess Anne character. Elizabeth, I don't think is really meant to be closely based on Sophie Wessex, but is like kind of a younger bride in the royal family and has lots of kids. And both of these women are just solely defined by how horny they are. Like, there's nothing more to them than their like rampant sex drives. And I think that joke is maybe funny the first couple of times, but after 450 pages I kind of thought like, these women are just like a punchline.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, and be honest. Do I make you horny, baby?
Clive is a problem for me. He is just like, again, another cartoon villain. And I find it really hard to place him like as the same person that was Bex's boyfriend for like a portion of the first book and was quite nice to her.
Yeah.
And like obviously then he turned into like a very self-interested like asshole monster character, but at this point he's just like not human.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose their reasoning for it is that Clive did what he did in the first book out of supposed necessity. Like, he needed money, he needed a story, he needed to have a career, I suppose, and he made the decision that he thought would get him that, and that he had wanted to try and have this kind of relationship that he hints at in this book with Bex about, like, we could have had a great thing going, you could have placed stories in the press and stuff. I suppose their argument is still that he's trying to keep his career going by shit talking, like that's what he has decided his brand is.
Yeah.
But I would have liked them to meet in person or something, or like maybe for them to be a little bit more depth to Clive, that maybe there's some remorse, maybe that he's like, give me something else.
Yeah. Speaking of meeting people in person, I was very surprised how Emma just vanished in this one.
Yeah.
Emma is Nick's mother, the kind of Princess Diana character, and she was a really big part of the first one, and it felt like maybe they didn't know what to do with her in this one.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, there's only so much you can do with somebody who doesn't speak.
Yeah, but I suppose, you know, like we were saying, Bex spent a lot of this book on her own. You know, it would have made sense to me if they'd wanted to send Bex up to spend time with Emma, not necessarily to have a conversation, but to, like, see her because she's her mother-in-law, and also that she could speak some of these things out loud.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about what is the book's attitude towards the royal family as an institution. And like obviously like we quoted the authors saying that it's like a soap opera for them, so they aren't quite as interested in it as that. But there's also parts of the books where the characters say like the family is a business.
Yeah.
They're obviously cognizant of that. Like one of the things that really stood out to me is that Bex like really never does any work.
Yeah.
And like there's a bit where she says she's looking forward to skipping ahead to the actual work, and Lacey's like, what is a Duchess's job exactly? And Bex says, I have no idea. My main responsibility used to be etiquette training, and now it's, look everyone, we're not acting awkward. No one has told me what the next phase is. And no one ever seems to tell her what the next phase is. It's just having a baby.
Yeah, and we get the tabloids like criticising her for being work shy. But I do think that the book makes a case for the royals working really hard, which I don't necessarily buy, but they, you know, make a big fuss about her preparations for that royal tour of Canada, and how they're like testing each other, and they have all these binders, and it seems like it's a month of preparation of every evening them quizzing each other on different facts and things.
Yeah, and I know, like, she does seem to be working on the Paint Britain, like, one of her patronages, like, in the background a little bit, but it really just seems like 5 years or something go by and she does, like, 2 events.
I mean, there certainly doesn't seem to be any kind of long-term project she's working on with Paint Britain. It seems to be more, like, turning up at events, like, sitting in on meetings and things like that, which, you know, I suppose we know that royals do kind of like to do, and then claim that that's been a big job for them.
I thought it was quite unusual that Bex says she's not a religious person at all. And I think we kind of knew that in the first book, but I don't think you're allowed to not be a religious person when your husband is going to be the head of the Church of England.
Yeah, I think you're definitely not meant to say that.
I mean, she only says it to us.
We get kind of the stuff about how the royal family loves to communicate through imagery, like when Eleanor leaks to the press that Bex is wearing a brooch that was the Queen Mum's to the funeral in order to give her a boost, like to boost her popularity.
Yeah, and knows that she'll get good headlines for wearing like a loaned piece of jewellery, but we'll talk about that a little bit in our Fit for a Queen. I just wanted to flag where they talk about Eleanor's lifetime of agony, and you know, with all of the heirs, with Eleanor, with Richard, and with Nick, they all just feel so sorry for themselves at different points in this book and in the last book as well. And it's a really strong case for abolishing the monarchy, don't you think? Like, all these people are miserable. But then when given the choice, they can't leave. They can't get out of there. And I thought it was maybe a little bit telling when Bex reflects on how Eleanor embodies the best of what our lives as royals could be, devoted to service, beloved by country, and a living symbol of history. And I guess that's what the book thinks is the best the royals could be as well.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of this book, I suppose because they've decided to make it that there's this massive lie at the centre, you kind of think that the devotion to service is a bit of a sham, and she might be beloved by the country, but she seems to be hated by her family at certain
And she's
points.
lying to her country.
Yeah. And, I mean, a living symbol of history, sure, but if that
It's a
history
history
is all...
she's rewritten.
Yeah. So I suppose they're kind of writing what is best to be the royals, but also undermining it at the same time.
There were a few kind of real life Easter egg moments that, I mean, I'm sure you guys noticed and probably noticed more than us as well. But there was just a few I thought we could mention that were interesting. I think both of us were very excited by the Eleanor portrait.
Yeah.
That it was based on the slutty portrait of Queen Victoria that we saw at Kensington Palace, which it's the same pose she's doing that Victoria did. Eleanor is seated with her back to the viewer. She's shooting what could only be called a come hither gaze over her shoulder. That it was quite scandalous at the time.
Really good, yeah, I liked that.
I couldn't see Queen Elizabeth doing that.
I was very perplexed by the fact that they name check Andrew Morton.
Yeah, when Eleanor's like, I better never see this mentioned in any of Andrew Morton's dreadful books or something like that. And it's like, how has Andrew Morton become famous in this universe? What did he write about?
Yeah, exactly. There's no big Diana Tell book
Yeah.
in this.
Those who listened to our Sophie and Edward bonus episode may have picked up on Edwin chatting to a famous theatre producer, which we can only imagine is meant to be Andrew Lloyd Webber.
And Eleanor makes an off-the-cuff kind of remark when she's talking about how everything seems to be going wrong. She says, perhaps the building will burn down next, which is, a reference to the Windsor Castle fire that happened during her Annus Horribilis.
Like Prince Charles, Richard paints watercolours, but in these books his are actually good.
Yeah.
Charles's are famously fine.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a bit in the first book when Beck sees one of Richard's watercolours of Emma and she's like, this was beautiful. And then in this book as well, she sees another one of his paintings and is really
she says
stunned
it's
by it.
Really accomplished painter. She doesn't know that it's his. And then he's like, yeah, this is a painting I did with some kids. And it's does a double service of he's an incredible painter, but also he paints with children, so he can't be all bad.
They eat at Bumpkin, one of Will and Kate's favourite restaurants in South Kensington. And I guess then our other favourite is also portrait-based, when Bex gets a hideous portrait like the portrait of Kate at the National Portrait Gallery, which is never on display.
Just in the way that Bex is always out for cleaning in this. And I think the Fug Girls have noted regularly when they've gone to try see the Kate portrait that it always seems to be out for cleaning.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that portrait, it is so funny. Look it up.
Something else.
I could have done without the Boris Johnson appearance.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality we're living. We don't need to see it in fiction.
I know, and they kind of make him funny and stuff, and it's also interesting that Brexit doesn't exist in this world, and
yeah.
I don't know if they could have handled it in a way that would have fit with the tone of it. But if you're going to have Boris Johnson, who is now the Prime Minister, who is Brexit champion, then Brexit should have been mentioned, I think. But I can understand why they didn't do it.
I was very intrigued by one character who I think we could have seen a lot more of, and that was someone Richard had been sleeping with called Jane, who was described as an earthy, equestrian woman.
Sound familiar?
He is a very, very fit man.
When they go on their royal tour in Canada, they see some anti-monarchist demonstrations, but also some climate change protesters who are criticising them for getting private flights. A big hot button topic.
Yeah.
And Beck says, a problem I understood but couldn't solve, given how often I was expected to change my clothes in transit.
When that was the reason that they gave, I was like really kind of perplexed. I was like, I was sure, you know, if you're going to try to justify it, you talk about like the security issues or something like that, but like because she needs somewhere to change, like,
Yeah.
I think you can maybe build that into your schedule somewhere else.
When Nick was criticised for crying during an engagement, that reminded me of when Harry was criticised for crying during that speech he gave last year. And this, in the book, the Mail report says a stiff upper lip does you no good if your lower one trembles, and calls it a breach of British tradition, which is, you know, all that conversation around Harry and Meghan and the stiff upper lip and stuff that kind of called that to mind for me.
Yeah.
One of the things I did find interesting, and again, like, this is a book that I don't think even has a British publisher yet, like you were saying, they use some American words that I've never heard British people say. Like, they have a British person talking about big candy when I don't think people ever say anything other than sweets.
Or, you know, perhaps big confectionery, you might say.
And also they describe a pasta dish as noodles.
I mean, to be specific, Maeve, they describe it as a tuna noodle casserole. So, do you know what? Not only do we not have it here, but you can fucking keep it. It sounds disgusting.
Because in the first book, they had, I think it was Richard and Agatha, two characters anyway, who described Bex as wearing a horrible sweater. And that's, I mean, like, I remember like one posh person I used to work with described it as a sweater, but that was in Ireland, and I think that was a bit of an outlier. That's not a word that people would use here. They just call it a jumper.
Yeah. But I think we're going to apply our usual categories of Quote of the Week, Fit for a Queen, and First in Line to the book this week.
Yeah, my quote of the week, I mean, there were a lot of options, but for me, the one that stood out was towards the end when Beck says, "My entire life since I married Nick felt like a series of events where I was just waiting to get home and take off my hose."
Yeah, that was really good.
That was a very evocative line. I felt like I could feel the sensation of taking off the tights at the end of the day. And just like, I think it's interesting, like, how often she talks about, like, having to wear these fucking tights, and that she just accepts it.
Yeah.
Couldn't be me. But speaking of tights and fashion and stuff, there's a lot of interesting fashion notes, and obviously the Fug girls are fashion bloggers as well. But for Fit for a Queen, I thought we could talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, we get quite early on like an insight into the wardrobe strategy that they develop for Bex, which is, you know, they're very careful to mix high-end with high street and incorporate British brands. So this sounds very familiar because it's pretty much exactly what Kate's strategy is.
Except Bex's signature shoe is a beige suede Jimmy Choo rather than Kate's signature of her early years, those awful patent nude LK Bennett platforms, which were just...
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, leave them in 2011, why don't you? They do have a few kind of Kate-ish staples, like she wears some Jenny Packham, she wears a lot of Alexander McQueen, including a berry coat dress and matching shoes.
No mention of a hat band.
This is the early years. The hat bands didn't come into play until much later.
Consider me schooled. But Jessica Morgan said on the topic, "We try not to get too deep into clothes because there was a period of time where every young adult book and every chick lit book, including our young adult books, would really describe what people were wearing in brand-oriented detail. It didn't age that well. You want to be a little vague. We have a tendency to put Bex in stuff that Kate has worn previously, just as a little wink." Which I think works really well because I totally see what they mean about things dating kind of really badly. Whereas when you reference something that Kate has worn or something that's very similar to something Kate has worn, it might date, but the main thing you're getting is like, oh, I recognize that reference.
Yeah, and like if, you know, you're a fan of Kate and you pay attention to what she wears, then you do that kind of satisfaction of recognizing something.
Yeah.
I was wondering, was it a little wink at Meghan maybe when she wears Sarah Flint heels, which Kate hasn't worn, but Meghan has several times. Thought there was maybe a little bit of Meghan in that, but I guess the big thing to talk about is the jewels.
Yeah.
And the power of the jewels.
Yeah, Eleanor tells Bex, "Loaning you jewels will make them think I like you." which is so blunt. I did like that.
And Richard has this same feeling as well, like when he agrees to loan her the Lover's Knot tiara, which everyone knows. That's Diana's wedding tiara, and in the book it's Emma's wedding tiara, and he talks about the symbolism of it and that her wearing it would be seen as a clear endorsement from the family. And I liked the moment when she puts it on, and like there's a few bits where they talk about how awkward it is and how they have to put like a cushioned ring around the back of her head so it doesn't dig in, and how heavy it is, and like all the stuff about how uncomfortable it is, because you never think about that. You're just like, wow, dazzling jewels. But when Bex puts it on, she feels like a different person, and she thinks, I turned into someone foreign to myself. They're my eyes looking out from my own face, but what they saw was a person from a tabloid too distant to touch. And she says to her hairdresser, Kira, I just don't look like me. And Kira says, I hate to break it to you, but I think this is what you look like now.
That was a nice moment, and I feel like it's the kind of comment that you would get to a royal that you would only really get to someone who's like married into the royal family. Like they have a really nice relationship where you're able to get that insight, I guess.
I think as well, like the first book is obviously written like looking back, and she's able to have those moments of reflection. Like, when I look back on this moment, I wish I could give myself a hug or whatever. And in the second book, it's all unfolding in the present. So you don't get as much of that reflection, which I really enjoyed in the first book. But this was one of those moments that I felt stood out. But she wears the tiara with the outfit for the state dinner with the Dutch royal family. And this, I think, is got to be the fit for a queen, because this outfit is the most striking. And also, I think, just to point out, I'm pretty sure the Dutch queen is Maxima, right?
Yeah.
Because of her hats and everything, very like Maxima. But what did you think of this outfit?
I loved it. I mean, I know Bex hated it, but so it was a pink Alexander McQueen dress shot through with subtle gold swirls, like a brocade you'd use to upholster an expensive chair in a child's nursery, with leg of mutton sleeves and poof ball skirt. And I was like, this is so fun.
Yeah, and she describes it as like Molly Ringwald's dress at the end of Pretty in Pink, crossed with Nick's mother's wedding gown with a dash of a hot air balloon.
Diana's wedding dress with a dash of hot air balloon. Like, how do you get any more hot air balloon than what Diana wore?
I know, and I think, I mean, I have to point out that it's like there's no way that they would get an Alexander McQueen dress the day of an event without having seen what it was going to look like before and done multiple fittings for a state dinner. But at the same time, it was very fun, and I was like desperate to see what this dress looked like, because I feel like I would personally love it. Like, some of the descriptions of it made me think of the blue dress that she wore to that state dinner with the Alexander McQueen dress, and it was that kind of taffeta material just above the knees. It flared out into that kind of ruffle they describe here, and I was thinking like there was elements of that, but I couldn't pick up on if there was any dress Kate had worn that was like this. If you know what it is, please send us a picture or something, because I also looked through a few Alexander McQueen collections trying to find out if it was a real dress, but I don't think it was. I love the idea of this whole look.
Yeah, it sounded absolutely stunning.
Even though she was very uncomfortable in it and she couldn't walk and she hated it, it was still fun to read.
Some things are more important.
What about first in line, Tom? Who is your first in line from the Heir Affair?
For me, it's Freddie. Because I just felt like he had so many hard decisions to make, and he didn't really have the same support. He had to make decisions for himself. He was in the process of going through quite a lot of personal change in terms of like growing up, reassessing what he wanted in life, and he had to deal with a lot of shit from his family.
Yeah, and it's like he has absolutely no friends other than his family and Daphne. So I feel like that, and as well as that being used as the human shield, as the fall guy, yeah, I really felt for him. And, you know, at the same time, he brings a lot of humour. I think he's the funniest character, and I think he's very different from Harry in that way. Like, I feel like Harry doesn't have this kind of sense of humour at all. He's so much like quicker and like sharp-witted than I would imagine Harry is. And I just think he's adorable. And there is a part of me that will wish that him and Bex had ended up together somehow. I think like overall, I would say I really enjoyed this book. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first one because I feel like there was a lot going on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that if they had taken some of it out, then I would have really enjoyed the book, because there's so much about the characters that I really like. There's so much about the situations that they were placed in that is so interesting. But I think because the ending didn't land for me, like there was too much in it and it was too rushed and I didn't understand the decisions. And that is what you're left with when you finish a book. So that was kind of unfortunate about it, but I enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, I'd read a third one as well.
Yeah.
I think that wraps up our discussion on the Heir Affair. We are going to be taking next week off, but you can look forward to celebrating Camilla's 73rd birthday on Friday. That's why we're taking next week off, to really do it justice. But as well as that, Meghan will be speaking at the Girl Up Global Leadership Summit alongside Michelle Obama and Storm Reid, Priyanka Chopra, a whole bunch of other people. They don't have like a schedule yet, but it's a 3-day event, all online. It's free from Monday to Wednesday. So Meghan will be speaking at some point over that. If you are interested, you can register for free online. I'm very interested to see what happens. And we will be back in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking about that and whatever else the royals get up to in the meantime. Thank you so much for listening. We really enjoyed reading The Heir Affair, and we'd love to know what you guys thought of it. Please send us your thoughts, your bits you loved, bits you thought were funny, bits you thought didn't work. We would love to keep the conversation going. You can contact us on Instagram and Twitter at airheadspod, or on Facebook at airheads, or you can send us an email, airheadspod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And why not leave us a 5-star review with your review of The Heir Affair in the comments, because then we can read all of your thoughts. And as always, if you liked this episode, why not tell a friend how much you loved it? And until 2 weeks' time, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Zoom fashion is very interesting because everybody can look very smart on the top. But I think if somebody took a camera underneath, they'd find some very interesting sights.
Yes.